It is counterintuitive, but asking good questions is not about asking questions. It is about active listening.
The best way to influence a customer is to use their own words when you're trying to help solve their problems. This helps eradicate the idea that you're just trying to sell them or get a bigger footprint in the account. And depending on where your relationship is, maybe a couple months or even multiple years, the types of questions you ask will evolve. So let's start at the beginning. When you're just starting off the relationship or just thinking about what a new opportunity or risk could be, what are the best types of questions to ask?
Well, you normally need to start by asking questions that are factual and that are going to give you enough information to know the current situation of your customer. In particular, if you haven't had a good long-standing relationship with them, it's good to start with something that is factual. It's not going to be controversial, but it's also going to help you know where you're starting with at that point.
Could sound like something like, hey, last year you mentioned that you're switching CRMs and that it's going to be a massive overhaul. Has that project been kept on target? And now you would say yes or no. That's a fact. You know if they're switching over to something new. And then you will say yes or no, it's not on target. And then that leads us nicely into the next type of question. What is that?
Yes. So once you know the different situation or the information fully for the situation of your customer, then you can start asking a little bit more questions regarding the processes that or workflows that they're going through in order to be successful in their own department. So for instance, if you're selling hiring software that helps your customers find the best candidates, you can start asking questions regarding how does it work for you whenever you are sourcing new candidates, or how does it work for you, the different recruitment processes. And whenever they're talking about the processes, there's always going to be blockers, things that are going to impede them to be successful, to be able to hire the best people, for instance.
And if you already have data, use it. If you can find something on LinkedIn, for example, that they've grown by 22%, use that to preface it. Show that you're still researching, that you know something about them, and then you can ask them to validate. Hey, I noticed that you hired 20% more marketing folks in the last quarter. Did I understand that right? And by starting off in that way, that's a situational question. Did I get that right? You can then go into those hiring best practices. What are some of the biggest challenges you found making sure that they get onboarded in doing the right types of things that are your priorities? And then they start talking about process or issues, but this all maps back to the most important thing. This is uncovering impact. What types of impact should we be focusing on?
Once you uncover the pain, you need to know what is the implication of not taking action with that pain. So that is what we call impact. For instance, if you know your customers bought your product, they're using it for hiring people, but they're hiring a lot of new people and they're not onboarding those people on time to get a good return of investment, you're probably going to have a huge negative impact in that investment that they're putting into hiring those people. And maybe your product can help with that. That's one of the things that you need to be listening, actively listening, in order to know if your customers are actually using the product to its full potential.
And use some of the data that you have. Try and figure out what types of engagement they've already experienced, or as they're adding in new people, how many new people versus how many people have stopped using it. Maybe they've left the company or they forgot about it. And figuring out those data and coming back to them in order to help you achieve the impact that you were looking for, here's some recommendations that we have. But ultimately, people make decisions when there's a timeline associated, a deadline. You can know this based on your initial conversations, but oftentimes businesses shift. No business is ever static if they're trying to stay competitive and continue to grow. So identifying critical events are critical, no pun intended. But what are some ways that we could ask about that?
Yes, critical events are always driven with a date and an impact, so an implication of not taking action. For instance, going back to our example of selling a software that helps your customers hire more people, maybe someone at really high level, let's say the VP of people or the HR manager left the company. That's probably going to be a really critical event whenever they're hiring a new person, for you to get into that account and talk to the new person or the person that is going to be in charge of hiring the replacement in order to know what the plan is going to be. You want to avoid as well the new person coming and trying to change everything in terms of tool stack, but as well in processes and workflows.
And the nuance is because you know the customer so well, it's very easy to skip over this or just assume that you know, and then all of a sudden be blindsided when an executive that you were relying on has left the company. And now you have to rebuild that relationship. But starting to get ahead of it, like when are the board meetings? When are key moments that matter in your budget cycle? Asking about those and then verifying in the future, potentially subtly, being like, hey, we're approaching September, which I remember you saying is where your team is potentially meeting for a strategy session, can be a really important thing to verify if any new priorities have come up and how finally decisions are being made.
Always multi-thread as well. If you're, for instance, measuring your NPS only on one person and that person leaves, you're completely blindsided. You need to know from different sources. You need to be asking questions to different people to know the real situation, the real pains, the real implications or impacts of all the different changes that are going through your customers.